Hello there folks, and welcome back to another speed paint video. Lately, I've been getting back into the Pokemon TCG, not in any real competitive way, more in a very hyper-casual sort of setting. As a kid, circa, I think 2005, 2006, I used to play a lot with my dad. I had this deck that was centered around a Mewtwo EX, I remember. It was pretty fun, it was very cool. And I've been slowly accumulating some cards over the years and really slowed down after the Hoenn era, to be honest. And I have all these cards sitting around, and my interest in the TCG got reignited by mainly two things. The first thing, probably obviously Pokemon TCG Pocket coming out. Been playing that a lot. It's been making me want to play the actual full tabletop TCG game because it's a fun little game and I'd like to be able to play with my friends. Another thing that's been getting me into it is for background noise while I've been drawing or doing other things for videos or other projects. I've been listening to the Dex Logs, which is this YouTube channel where they talk about the competitive history of the Pokemon TCG mainly. And just seeing those videos and seeing cards I remember and learning that they were either secretly busted or secretly kind of terrible but still had nice art anyway. Just the Pokemon TCG is really cool. I love the illustrations so much. The Gen 2, Gen 3 era, especially the 3D rendered illustrations, they're just so nostalgic for me. I just think they're so lovely and fun to look at. I've been playing, like I said, I dug up my old trading card collection, and me and my friends have been building decks from all the cards I've had sitting around, so it's been fun, taking a look at all these old things and then trying to actually play with them instead of letting them just sit around in a basement. Anyway, looking at all these cards lately has gotten me feeling, really inspired. The illustrations are always really charming. Like I said, I'm especially a fan of those 3D render type ones that are old. They're just so cool. So I thought today I would draw some of my favorite Pokemon illustrations. I think I'm going to make this into something of a series where I'll redraw Pokemon card illustrations, and for this week's video, I'm going to be drawing some Dark Pokémon. This is one of my favorite archetypes of Pokemon in the TCG. I just think the illustrations are always really fun. How do we make this Pokemon look evil? Sometimes, with Wigglytuff, they just have it sitting on a couch looking really rude. Sometimes they have some, genuinely menacing art for other Pokemon. And sometimes they have something that is just objectively, really funny. But if it did happen to you, it would be devastating. With Dark Dugtrio, who is just doing a massive amount of property damage in its illustration. So today I thought I would draw some Dark Pokemon for you guys, some of my favorite card illustrations, and yeah, let's just get right into the speed paint. The first card I'm going to be redrawing is Dark Dragonair from the Team Rocket expansion. I have no idea how we got a copy of this card, because in my house we have, I believe, just one copy of it, and weirdly enough, it is in Japanese. Which is really weird because my family, we're not Japanese, and my parents were both born and grew up in the United States, and I've lived here all my life, and there's a couple of weird Pokemon cards in my collection that are inexplicably just not in English, and I have legit no idea how my parents would have gotten them, because I certainly wasn't the one buying the Pokemon cards when I was in, kindergarten. We just have a Japanese Dark Dragonair card, and I've always thought the illustration was really nice. I could never play with it because I couldn't read the text on it as a kid, but it's really cool realizing that it's actually a Dark Pokemon, not just a regular Dragonair with weirdly menacing eyes. I just love the color palette in this one. It's so serene. It reminds me of this one children's book about dragons I read when I was a kid. And I love the crystals, I love the colors, I love the blue line art, and I love this way of making Dragonair look kind of menacing, which I feel like is a little tough because it is a very pretty little noodle creature, and I feel like its energy seems very docile, so to make it actually look menacing or rude or mean seems like kind of a challenge, and I think this card does a good job of making this thing look kind of sinister. My goal with this speed paint isn't really to draw these as accurately as possible, as much as it is to study these illustrations and have fun recreating them through, my own art style and how I like to do my process. One of my favorite things with this illustration was doing the crystals in the background. I had a lot of fun interpreting them in the way I like to render crystals digitally. I didn't do like the smooth gradient shading that you see in the original illustration. I did more of like a crunchy, like, I'm imagining like a crystal that's like full of flashes, which are those little iridescent shines with rainbows and stuff that you see in a crystal. I just took a lot of inspiration from those kinds of rocks when I was working on it. I also kind of gave them a more rugged texture, something similar to like obsidian. I was kind of thinking in my head as I was starting to draw it out, because I like drawing lines like that, and I think it kind of gives like this freshly grown crystal vibe. Like, it's almost like this Dragonair summoned these crystals and they just grew beneath it, was sort of the idea I was going for. I had a lot of fun with the background too. It's incredibly simple with just like the clouds and the lightning, but I haven't really sat down to do some fun lightning effects in digital art since, man, I don't know, like high school maybe. I used to do lots of illustrations with glowing elements in it, with a little like airbrush action on top to add that extra finesse and give it a little extra sparkle and shine and glow. And I haven't really done that process in a really long time, so it was kind of nice going back to do a process that felt nostalgic for me and not just looking at an illustration that makes me feel nostalgic. So this one was just a lot of fun. This pose was a little bit tricky, but I got to a place where I was pretty happy with it. I definitely drew this Dragonair chunkier, but you know, I think it kind of gives it a little bit more volume. It makes it look like it's more solidly sitting down instead of flying through the air, which I don't really mind for this redraw. I think it looks pretty good. I think it gives it a little bit of weight and direction to how it's sitting the way I drew it this time, and I just think it's fun. I tried to make it look like a curious but like apprehensive snake. Snake body language is like really funny because they really don't have a lot to work with when it comes to their body language. They've really only got, you know, the tube. So yeah, having had a pet snake for the past couple of months and like getting to learn the way he communicates. And honestly, like, my snake Gilbert, I don't think he's ever, like, had any sort of annoyed stance with us. Like, he's a very relaxed animal. But I have seen what, like, more agitated snakes look like, and, like, sometimes they stand up more. Or they'll, like, kind of, like, use their head. They'll open their mouth if they're really angry. Like, a lot of animals will open their mouth if they're really angry, actually. It's, like, weird that humans, we like to open our mouth to show that we're happy. It's kind of a strange thing that we do. But yeah, I just got inspired by like snake body language to use on this Dragonair. And fun fact, while I was working on this illustration, I kept accidentally calling Dragonair Gardevoir for some reason, and I think it's just because the names have very similar syllables. And my brain was like completely fogged the week I was working on this. Needless to say, I was kind of woozy and weird while I was working on this, so I kept saying this was Gardevoir, even though it's literally not. It's Dragonair. This is Dark Dragonair, and I really hope you guys enjoyed watching this process because I had fun drawing this illustration. The next Pokemon card I'm going to be redrawing is Dark Celebi from EX Hidden Legends, who I think in Japanese is originally called Rocket Celebi, but shh, it still counts as a dark Pokemon in my heart because it's got the dual dark type in the card, and I grew up with this card, and I still think of this as being like a dark Pokemon. I've always associated this card with like the way Celebi becomes like a quote-unquote dark Pokemon in the fourth Pokemon movie, Pokemon Forever. And it gets caught by the Dark Ball, becomes like all evil and malevolent for a little bit, and this card has always reminded me of that. I've always interpreted this as being like the card for that version of Celebi as a kid, even though the eyes are definitely way more bright in this illustration than they were in the anime when it was being very evil, but I just love this illustration. Like I said, I love these old style 3D CG renders. I don't know, there's something about them that I find incredibly charming. Like, this era of early CG used for illustration is incredibly nostalgic to me. Like, it feels like a very fine balance between, like, what these Pokemon would look like in real life versus, like, a very nice looking high quality toy. Another example of some of my favorite 3D render type Pokemon are the Team Aqua and Team Magma series. They have these wonderful illustrations of Poochyena and Mightyena that literally look so cute. Like, I just think these are so charming. They feel like real dogs or hyenas, but they also clearly are Pokemon. and they still have like this plushy feel as opposed to like a real animal feel. I don't know what it is. There's just this lovely quality about like, it feels like the world feels huge in some of the Pokemon card illustrations, especially the ones that are the 3D renders, especially in this era, because they feel like they imply so much about their world. Although this one has a very simple background. This one's not too crazy. It's really just like, kaboom, there's a bunch of leaves. This pose was a little tricky to get down while I was working on it. So I ended up changing it a little bit just to be, I don't know, a little bit more movement-like in the version I drew, and the framing of Pokemon card illustrations can be kind of strange when they're in isolation compared to like when they're actually on the full card. Like you'll see in the last one, there's like some very interesting stuff going on with like lines being extremely close to the edge of the illustration, but it looking fine on the card because the card still has a margin. And it's an interesting challenge trying to interpret these like poses and compositions in the same aspect ratio. Like I'm still using the same aspect ratio here for these illustrations, but trying to interpret them in a way that it feels like the illustration can stand on its own instead of only making sense in the context of a frame. And I don't know, I just had a lot of fun. The shadows in this one are very interesting. I love how green they are in the original illustration. Honestly, these original 3D renders remind me a lot of the Pokemon models in like Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon Coliseum and stuff. And this has always reminded me of the Celebi model from that, even though I'm pretty sure the game model is different than this. Like, I think it's lower poly, and I think the eyes are different. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, but anyway, I had a lot of fun redrawing this. This one is probably the most different looking out of all the redraws I have for you guys today, because obviously I'm doing a 2D drawn illustration version of a thing that was originally like a CG render. But I still think it was pretty fun. I had a lot of fun interpreting the holofoil effect. My favorite, like, type of holographic paper would have to be, like, the orb holo, which is something that was huge in this era of the TCG, and I'm very glad. I've been seeing a couple of cards that have that style of holofoil in the newer cards, so that's great for me and what I love. I tried to capture looking at an actual holographic card in my illustration, even though the original illustrations probably didn't have those effects, just because for me, that was a huge part of the experience of having these cards, was getting to, you know, mess around with the foil and look at it at different angles. I had a lot of fun with this one. This one was probably the biggest challenge, I would say, but I really love this card, and it was a delight to try to reinterpret it. The last card I'm going to be redrawing for you guys today is Dark Ampharos from the EX Team Rocket Returns expansion. And this is an illustration that I'm actually not that familiar with. I did not grow up having this card. If I do have it, I can't say I've refound it in my collection. I don't really remember it. But I just thought this was like a fun pose and a fun angle to work with. So when I was on Cerebi looking at the list of all the Dark Pokemon, this one really stuck out to me as being like an interesting illustration that felt pretty different from the other two I had already drawn up to this point. And yeah, it's just cute. I love Ampharos. It's a very easy Pokemon for me to draw. It's got a lot of very simple shapes. And it's also very funny because this is not a Pokemon you typically imagine being mean. So getting to see like an Ampharos who's making like a stank face, who's like kind of mad and maybe gonna zap you the person, not just your Pokemon. I think that's kind of funny in a way. My friends and I, we have this game we play on Discord, and it's a game called Evil Ball. It's a game where I take a Pokemon card scan and I just show them an attack on it, and I try to get them to guess which Pokemon it's from, since the Pokemon attacks in the TCG are like way more open-ended than in the video games. And I do think we played a game of Evil Ball with this Ampharos card back in the day, because I remember reading the name Darkest Impulse for the Pokébody, and I just remember that for that context only. Oh, and the original Evil Ball card, if you aren't already aware, is the original Yveltal EX from the X and Y base set, I believe. I'll see if I can pull that card up there, but it was the very first one we played, and then we decided that Evil Ball, that name sounds like a game, it sounds like a sport, So that's what we've been calling the game where I show them the Pokemon attacks and they have to guess the Pokemon. It's a lot of fun. You guys should honestly try that game at home. Play Evil Ball, why not? It's a very funny way to play the TCG. Anyway, Dark Ampharos. I don't have this card, but this, like, the Pokebody name has some nostalgia for me because of my associations with the silly game I play with my friends. This card has such an interesting shading style. Like, some of the dark Pokemon have a really dramatic, just pitch black shadow that's like a nice cell shade on them. And I tried to reinterpret that a little bit by, instead of just making it a very dark shadow, I made a little warm line around the edge to give it some extra intensity, a little bit more visual interest. And just like I did with Dragonair, I got to do a lot of fun lightning stuff. There's like a huge lightning, like, glob, I guess, surrounding Ampharos as it's like, I assume, charging up to do a huge attack. Maybe Shock Bolt if you look at the card itself. And I really want to emphasize the fun and glowy aspect. Like, the very movement-filled abstract background is such a fun thing to do in the Pokemon card illustrations. Like, I feel like Pokemon card illustrations are either like the most beautiful landscape you've ever seen or like this incredible abstract background. Like, there's very little in the in-between there. And this one definitely falls into an incredible abstract background. Like, I just think it's very cool. It's very fun. It's so high contrast and, like, so different from the traditional Pokemon art style, too. And it's also very different from the way I usually draw, so trying to capture elements of this style while still making it clearly read as my own. This was a very interesting challenge, but I think even though this was the simplest illustration, I think it's got a lot going for it. The movement and the angle are just so interesting, and yeah, it's just very cool. I think the nose being close to the top of the frame in the original illustration maybe had to, like, rethink how I was going to frame this because I didn't want it to be too close to the edge, but I think I'm pretty happy with how I ended up framing it. It was very fun doing the lightning and, like, using both a regular and eraser version of the same brush to really get the shapes that I wanted, and really just letting my hand guide me and just totally going off of intuition to get those lightning shapes in a way that resembles the original illustration while also still having, like, the movement of a freehand random drawing, if that makes sense. Anyway, I'm happy with this one. This was a very fun illustration to do, and I hope you guys like it as well. And with that, that's all the art I got for you guys today. Which of these Pokemon cards was your favorite redraw today? Do you have any favorite Pokemon card illustrations? Do you have, like, a favorite group of Pokemon from the Pokemon TCG? I know there's a lot more groups out there, like Poland's Pokemon, or Light Pokemon, Shining Pokemon, and then the entire variety of shiny Pokemon like Radiant and Goldstar. Delta species are one of my favorites too. There's just a lot of options. And there's also the newer ones like GX and V cards, and I'd love to redraw different categories of Pokemon cards one day, so if you have any suggestions of any illustrations that I might not know about, please let me know, because I'd love to look at some cool Pokemon art. If you would like to support me, I recommend checking out my Ko-fi page. There you can commission me, you can check out my shop, which has lots of stuff like zines and adoptables. I've also got blog posts I do on there. I try to do them every couple of weeks where I update sort of my progress on all my different art projects going on, so it's kind of like being on a mailing list if you decide to follow me on Ko-fi. Plus, it's a great way to support me as well. I've also got monthly memberships on Ko-fi, so if you're interested in supporting me on a consistent basis and helping me do stuff like paying my bills, taking care of my pet snake, paying off student debt, all that kind of stuff, if you'd like to help, I really, really, really appreciate it. And if you like what you see here, feel free to subscribe. I can't believe it's been a while since I reached it, but I can't believe I'm past 100 subs, so it's really cool to see that. I'm glad to be building a cool little audience of people who like my fun little doodles. And I'm excited to do more art next time. I might do another TCG redraw video next week. Who knows? We'll see where my inspiration takes me. So I believe with that, that's all I've got for you all today. So thank you all so much for watching. I will see you again next week with another speed paint video. And in the meantime, why don't you go out there and make some art?